A Drug Trial Cycle: Recovery, Relapse, Reinvention by Kyle Al-Khatib. Dr. Keith Flaherty is the Director of Developmental Therapeutics at the Massachusetts General Hospital Cancer Center and Associate Professor of Medicine at Harvard Medical School. He also attended Johns Hopkins University for his education. He's the leader of the experimental drug trial for PLX4032, which is a drug that is given to patients with advanced melanoma. During this trial, it was found that if this drug is taken by a patient with melanoma, it will stop the melanoma for about 6 months. Patients with melanoma have a mutated BRAF gene, and what PLX4032 does is that it'll block certain proteins that the mutated BRAF gene are made. This will cause the cancer to stop growing. This drug is placed under the category of a kinase inhibitor, which is an enzyme that adds phosphates to a protein so that it can change the function of that particular protein. So this is what PLX4032 looks like, and this picture over here is the process of how the PLX4032 works. So you can see right over here that the BRAF gene produces MITF over here, but when you add PLX4032, it does not create that unwanted protein that causes the melanoma to expand to other places. So as discussed on the previous slide, PLX4032 blocks the proteins made because of the mutated BRAF gene. This blockage of this specific protein is able to stop the melanoma for about 6 months during the experimental trial, but now a second mutation has developed, causing more unwanted proteins to be created, which causes the melanoma to continue spreading. Christopher Nelson was one of the patients that was included in this experimental study, and he had a miraculous recovery because of this new drug until he lost his appetite again. Another one of the patients had passed away. After this occurred, Dr. Flaherty discussed testing PLX4032 with a combination of other drugs that targeted other mutations, thinking that this would help deter the second mutation from occurring. Roche is the pharmaceutical giant that had developed PLX4032, and they have made plans to test more drugs in hopes of getting a quick approval by the FDA. This meant that Dr. Flaherty and his colleagues in the laboratory had to figure out how this second mutation happened and why the drug stopped working. Dr. Flaherty had to try and convince the pharmaceutical industry to change their standard operating procedures because this would be the fastest way to get a drug approved. He would also need to try and keep his patients alive during this experimental process. The problem with getting these drugs approved quickly is that the FDA has a lengthy process of approving drugs, as it has one of the longest and strictest approval processes in the world. The average time it takes a drug to be approved through the FDA is about 12 years. A short summary of this process is that the drug has to be reviewed by the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, which is SDER. This is to make sure that the benefits of the drug outweigh the costs for the intended population. There has to be an analysis of the condition and the available treatments, then an assessment of benefits and risks from clinical data, and strategies for managing the risks that come with the drug. There is an accelerated process, but usually is only used when there is a serious or life-threatening condition, such as right now, the COVID-19 pandemic. And this accelerated process was used for the approval of the different vaccines that are being given today. Dr. Flaherty has been the breaker of bad news his entire career as he is an oncologist, but he has said that this time was the hardest one for him because Mr. Nelson was a close patient of his, and he was also a part of his experimental trials for the drug PLX4032. Mr. Nelson Mr. and Mrs. Nelson were very surprised as they thought this new drug that he was taking would continue to stop the melanoma, but it wasn't the case anymore. Dr. Flaherty told them that there is a new trial being run by GlaxoSmithKline for a drug that is supposed to treat the new mutation that is showing up. This got their hopes up. GlaxoSmithKline is the developer of this new drug, and they had informed Dr. Flaherty that Mr. Nelson had to wait at least a month to be a part of this new experiment so that his system can be cleared of the Roche medication that was being given to him by Dr. Flaherty during the experimental trials. Dr. Flaherty did not like the fact that he had to guess what the cure could possibly be for these mutations. It could be a combination of 5 drugs or even up to 10 drugs. The problem with this was that because of the incredibly long FDA approval process, these drugs would never be approved in time for a patient like Mr. Nelson to take. Because of this, a lot of unwanted problems started to occur. The researchers won't be able to know which drug would be the best treatment for the patient's condition. More frustration was caused by the fact that there are so many new targeted drugs to be tested, but no single one of them will likely hold off the cancer for that long. This frustration caused some researchers to pay for drug equivalents from designer knockoffs so that they can test them on animals. Because of all this frustration, Dr. Flaherty wanted to form an alliance between melanoma researchers so that they can figure out a way to get these drugs to be approved faster. It's very hard to do this because all of these researchers are competing for grant money and praise for their accomplishments, but Dr. Flaherty's PLX4032 success offered the best approach to treating cancer, and so the researchers agreed to meet in Boston to discuss these problems. The success of PLX4032 was the starting topic of this meeting, and the researchers were informed that its success has been elongated to 9 months instead of 6 months for stopping the spread of melanoma. They then discussed more, and everyone agreed with hammering out the legalities of pooling resources among institutions, and with Dr. Flaherty approaching these companies on behalf of the alliance. They first wanted to test PLX4032 with another drug that Roche owned. Glaxo, Novartis, Pfizer, and Bristol Myers Squibb also had drugs that could be used in this combination. Dr. Flaherty met with a Roche official in a Midtown Manhattan office, and the response to him was that it is in the patient's best interest to get PLX4032 approved for sale as quickly as possible. She insisted that this would be their focus right now and not the combination of other drugs. Dr. Meinhard Herlin met with someone as well and got the same exact response. Dr. Flaherty was then able to meet with Glaxo for his combination trial, and the executive at Glaxo hinted at a possible combination trial in the near future. The reason for this was because they could get it approved by the FDA soon after the single drug PLX4032 would get approved, but because of the better success rate with the combination of drugs, the combination would be a lot more successful, and these pharmaceutical companies would make a lot of money off of them. So that is why Glaxo was able to accommodate Dr. Flaherty. Meetings about this combination drug trial were also occurring with Novartis, Bristol Myers, and Pfizer. In mid-November, Mr. Nelson's tumors on his neck and his heart had shrunk, and he was excited because he would be able to go to the poker tournament the next month and to his son's birthday in January. But on January 5th, Mr. Nelson was taken to his appointment at Penn by his wife on a stretcher, and 3 days later he was taken to the hospice at the local hospital in an ambulance. Mrs. Nelson has since then said that the year after her late husband's diagnosis was a year that she would never trade in because of the success of the drug that elongated his life.